Aiden had always noticed the little things that others seemed to miss, the small details that revealed the hidden emotions of people around him. And on that rainy Thursday afternoon, as he ducked into a small, cozy cafe to escape the storm, he felt a strange mix of anticipation and calm that he couldn't explain, and as he ordered his coffee, his eyes wandered across the room, taking in the warm wooden furniture, the faint scent of roasted beans, the quiet hum of conversations blending with the patter of rain against the windows, and then he saw her, sitting alone in the far corner by the window, a delicate figure with chestnut hair falling gently over her shoulders, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea, her eyes distant yet curious, and she seemed lost in thought, a faint frown on her face that hinted at a hidden worry. And yet there was something captivating about the way she moved, the subtle tilt of her head, the nervous tapping of her fingers against the ceramic mug. The way her eyes darted to the door every so often as if waiting for someone who might never arrive, and Aiden felt a pull he couldn't ignore, a quiet magnetism that made him linger by the counter, pretending to check his phone but secretly watching her, noticing how her lips curved into a fleeting, shy smile when a child ran past the window chasing a puddle, how she twirled a strand of hair around her finger absent-mindedly, how the light from the overcast sky caught in her eyes and made them shimmer with a kind of melancholy that both intrigued and comforted him, and he wondered about her story, about what brought her to this place on this rainy day, whether she was waiting for someone she loved, or someone who had let her down, or whether she simply needed a moment to herself away from the chaos of life, and he imagined the life she led outside the cafe, the dreams she chased, the fears she hid, the laughter she shared only with those who truly knew her, and with each passing second, he felt a growing desire to reach out, to speak, to connect, to somehow break the invisible wall between them without startling her, yet every time he considered walking over, hesitation gripped him, a voice in his mind warning him not to intrude on her solitude, not to disrupt the fragile bubble she seemed to inhabit, and still, the sight of her, the subtle curve of her shoulders, the way she leaned slightly forward over her cup as if seeking warmth or comfort, made it impossible for him to leave, and when she finally looked up, catching his gaze for just a moment, and offered a small, polite smile, his heart skipped a beat, a mix of surprise and longing washing over him, and for that brief instant, it felt as if the world had paused, the rain, the chatter, the steam rising from mugs, all fading into the background, leaving just the two of them, strangers yet connected by an unspoken curiosity and an almost imperceptible sense of recognition, and he knew he had to do something, had to cross that distance, but as he moved toward the door, summoning the courage, a sudden customer blocked his path, a group of friends laughing loudly as they squeezed past, and the moment slipped away, leaving him outside in the drizzle, staring back through the glass, watching her return to her thoughts, her hands hugging the cup close, her expression softening as she exhaled slowly, perhaps unaware of the impact she had made on him, and he realized that sometimes connections begin not with words, but with observation, with attention, with noticing the subtle gestures, the small hints of emotion, the way someone's body language can speak volumes when their lips remain quiet, and he decided he would return, that he would find a way to meet her properly, to unravel the mystery that her presence had created in his mind, that strange mixture of longing, fascination, and gentle hope, and even as he walked back into the rain, feeling it soak through his jacket, he smiled to himself because he knew that life had a way of placing people in our path when we least expected it, and sometimes all it took was a fleeting glance, a small smile, a twirl of hair, a nervous fidget, to spark the beginning of something neither of them could yet name, and Aiden found himself already planning his next visit, imagining the conversation, imagining the laughter they might share, imagining the way her eyes would light up if he simply asked her about her day, and he understood, deep in his chest, that this was only the beginning, that a single moment could hold the weight of endless possibilities, that a stranger's presence could awaken emotions we didn't know existed, and as he turned the corner and disappeared into the drizzle, he carried with him the quiet hope that the next encounter would bring them closer, that the fragile thread of curiosity and attraction that connected them through a shared gaze and unspoken understanding would begin to weave a story neither of them had anticipated but both of them needed, and he felt a thrill at the unknown, a nervous excitement that made his heart race, because sometimes, the smallest, most ordinary moments could change everything, and Aiden knew, without fully understanding why, that this rainy Thursday, this cozy cafe, and this mysterious woman with chestnut hair and thoughtful eyes had already left an imprint on his soul, one that would guide his actions, his thoughts, and perhaps his heart, in ways he was yet to discover. And even as the rain continued to fall, soft and persistent, he carried the memory of that fleeting smile, the nervous twist of hair, the quiet grace of her posture, as if they were secret messages meant only for him, as if the universe itself had nudged him towards something significant, something tender, something emotional, and he walked on, heart pounding, mind racing, already anticipating the next chapter of this quiet, unexpected story that had begun in the most ordinary of places, yet felt like the start of something extraordinary. Aiden couldn't stop thinking about Alara after that first encounter in the cafe, her quiet grace, the way she had seemed both fragile and strong at the same time, and the next few days passed in a blur as he replayed every detail of that moment in his mind, imagining her smile, the nervous way she twirled her hair, the glint in her eyes that hinted at stories untold, and he found himself returning to the same cafe, hoping to catch another glimpse, to understand her better, to feel the pull he couldn't explain. And when he finally saw her again, sitting at the same corner table with a book open but her eyes wandering every so often to the rain-slicked window, he felt a rush of nervous excitement that made his chest tighten, and he realized that attraction was only part of what he felt. There was curiosity, a desire to understand the person behind the fleeting gestures, the subtle cues, the unspoken signals, and he took a deep breath, approached her table cautiously, feeling the heat of anticipation rise in his body, and she looked up, surprised but not alarmed, her eyes wide for a moment, then softening as if recognizing a familiar warmth in him, and he smiled, awkwardly at first, but with genuine intent, and they exchanged greetings, their voices low, almost blending with the soft background music and the occasional hiss of the coffee machine, and immediately he noticed the way her body subtly leaned toward him when he asked about her day, the way her hands rested on the table, fingers barely brushing the edge of the cup in a delicate dance of unconscious communication, and he felt that same inexplicable pull, stronger now, more insistent, a magnetic thread weaving between them, connecting them in ways neither had yet fully articulated. And as they talked about mundane things at first, work, weather, favorite books, fleeting memories from childhood, he paid attention to every small detail, the way she laughed softly when recalling a silly incident, her shoulders relaxing when she felt comfortable, the way her eyes sparkled as she described something she loved, and he realized that these gestures were telling him more than words ever could, a silent language of attraction, of comfort, of tentative trust, and he found himself matching her posture unconsciously, leaning in slightly, mirroring her movements, a subtle dance of nonverbal conversation that made their connection grow without either needing to speak of it directly, and he noticed the occasional nervous glances to the door or the brief fiddling with her hair, small hints of vulnerability that made her seem even more real, more human, more approachable, and yet more fascinating, and he understood that attraction could be quiet, subtle, expressed in glances, gestures, tiny shifts in posture, and he felt an unexpected tenderness toward her, a desire to protect that gentle openness he saw in her eyes, to earn her trust, to be someone she could rely on even in fleeting moments. And as the conversation progressed, he discovered layers of her personality that intrigued him further, her kindness, her thoughtful insights, her sense of humor that surfaced in brief, unexpected ways, the small confidences she shared about fears or dreams, the way she described moments that had made her happy or sad, and every revelation made him feel more connected, more drawn to her, more certain that this wasn't just casual curiosity, but something deeper, a growing emotional resonance that hummed quietly between them. And when he laughed at one of her stories, he noticed her subtle response, a soft smile that lingered longer than necessary, a tilt of the head that suggested interest, and he felt a thrill at the recognition that human connections could be so nuanced, so delicate, so emotionally layered, and he began to understand how gestures, body language, and unspoken communication were at the core of attraction and intimacy, how someone could say so much without uttering a single word, how a glance could express longing, hesitation, hope, or vulnerability, and he realized that understanding these cues could open doors to emotional closeness in ways words sometimes failed to achieve. And as the rain outside intensified, casting shimmering reflections across the window, their conversation deepened, moving beyond the superficial into personal dreams, quiet fears, and small regrets, and he felt a flutter in his chest as she shared a moment from her past, the way her eyes softened, the way her voice wavered slightly with memory, the subtle leaning toward him as if seeking an anchor, and he instinctively reached out, offering a comforting presence, a warm smile, a gentle tone, and he saw her relax, her body opening just slightly, shoulders less tense, hands less fidgety, and he knew that sometimes the human heart communicated most clearly in these subtle, unspoken ways, through posture, expression, movement, and reaction, and he felt a profound appreciation for this silent dialogue, for the chance to connect with someone who revealed themselves piece by piece through these tiny signals, and as the afternoon slipped into evening, the cafe bathed in the golden glow of fading sunlight, they laughed together at a shared joke, their hands brushed accidentally across the table, a small spark igniting between them, and he felt an undeniable electricity, not physical, but emotional, intimate, and tender, a sense of understanding and attraction that needed no explicit confirmation, a quiet acknowledgement of mutual interest and curiosity, and he realized he was learning her language, her subtle ways of expressing emotion and feeling, a dance of human connection that transcended words, and he found himself thinking about how much he wanted to see her again, to continue this exploration, to decipher the signals that hinted at what she felt but didn't say outright, and he noticed her glance linger on him just a fraction too long, her foot tapping lightly under the table, the faintest blush coloring her cheeks when he complimented something personal she had shared, and he understood that attraction and emotional connection were delicate, expressed through micro-movements, subtle gestures, fleeting expressions, and that he had been given a rare insight into someone's inner world through observation and attentiveness, and he felt both excitement and tenderness, a gentle longing that made his chest ache pleasantly, and he knew that this was the beginning of something significant, a slow unraveling of emotion and understanding, where every meeting, every word, every glance built upon the last, creating a tapestry of intimacy that was both thrilling and comforting, and as they finally stood to leave, exchanging a polite yet lingering farewell, he noticed her brief hesitation, the way her fingers lingered on the cup for a moment longer, the soft inhale before stepping away, and he felt the quiet hope that their paths would cross again soon, that the connection they had formed, unspoken yet deeply felt, would grow, and as he walked home through the wet streets, memories of her gestures, glances, laughter, and the subtle cues that spoke volumes played repeatedly in his mind, making him both restless and excited, imagining the next meeting, wondering what she would reveal next, what signals she might unconsciously send, how her body would speak her emotions even before her lips could, and he understood, more than ever, that human connection was an intricate dance of signals and responses, that attraction and emotional closeness often relied on these gentle, unnoticed cues, and that he was ready to pay attention, to learn, to respond, to be present, and that perhaps, in understanding these quiet gestures, he could come closer to her heart than words alone would allow, and he smiled, feeling the rain wash over him, feeling alive with anticipation, because he knew that this delicate, silent, emotional connection with Alara was just beginning, and that every subtle glance, every small touch, every mirrored gesture would build towards something tender, meaningful, and unforgettable. The next meeting between Aiden and Alara felt different from all the others, as if the universe had arranged this particular afternoon to push them closer, and from the moment he entered the cafe, he felt the familiar pull in his chest, the mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation, and there she was, already seated in her favorite corner, a book open before her but her eyes scanning the room with the same thoughtful curiosity that had drawn him in days ago, and when their eyes met, the brief surprise gave way to that small, intimate smile that made his heart skip, the kind of smile that spoke of recognition, of shared understanding, of something quietly building between them, and he walked over, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat matching the subtle patter of rain against the windows, and as he greeted her, she closed her book, setting it aside, her hands brushing lightly over the pages, a subtle gesture that seemed to signal openness, and he sat down across from her, feeling the slight shift of her body leaning forward, a small but unmistakable sign of interest and engagement, and the air between them seemed charged with a quiet energy, a mutual awareness that this meeting held more than casual conversation, and as they spoke, he noticed every detail, every nuance, every movement, From the way her lips curved when she found something amusing to the gentle way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she felt slightly shy or unsure, and he realized he was learning to read her in ways that went far beyond words. Understanding her emotions through subtle shifts in posture, fleeting glances, tiny smiles, and even the brief moments of hesitation, which seemed to carry their own quiet weight, and as they talked about everything and nothing, from favorite movies to childhood memories, from small fears to big dreams, he noticed how she mirrored his gestures unconsciously, a gentle synchrony that made him feel closer to her, more attuned, and he understood the language of body signals, the way leaning in, touching a hand to the cup, tilting the head, even the slight brush of their hands on the table, all conveyed volumes that words alone could not express, and as the rain continued outside, soft and steady, the warm light inside the cafe seemed to cocoon them in a private world, a place where hearts could speak quietly through gestures, glances, and shared laughter, and he felt an unexpected thrill, a tender excitement that made every small movement feel electric, every fleeting touch meaningful, and as the conversation grew deeper, they began to reveal more personal stories, subtle confessions about past heartbreaks, about moments of longing, about the vulnerability of hoping for something real in a world that often felt rushed and disconnected, and Aiden noticed how her hands tightened briefly around her cup when she spoke of disappointment, how her gaze softened when she mentioned a hope or a dream she had held quietly, how her smile faltered and then returned as if testing the waters of trust, and he felt honored to witness these expressions, to be present as she shared, to respond with attentiveness, empathy, and warmth, and in that moment, he realized that attraction and emotional intimacy were not just about words or actions, but about noticing, feeling, understanding, and responding to the subtle signals that revealed the heart, the mind, and the soul, and he found himself leaning closer, not in haste or boldness, but in gentle attentiveness, a silent gesture of care, a quiet acknowledgement of connection, and she responded in kind, her body leaning forward slightly, her eyes lingering on him just a fraction longer, a flicker of emotion passing between them that said more than sentences ever could, and he felt his chest tighten, a mixture of desire, tenderness, and anticipation, because he understood that they were building something rare, something fragile yet powerful, a bond rooted in empathy, observation, and emotional resonance, and as the minutes passed, the conversation wove between laughter, shared stories, gentle teasing, quiet admiration, and moments of comfortable silence, where neither needed to speak, where the presence of the other was enough, and he noticed her subtle reactions, the way her fingers brushed lightly against her notebook, the way she shifted slightly when she found something meaningful in his words, the fleeting sparkle in her eyes when she connected with his thoughts, and he understood that these small, seemingly insignificant gestures were loaded with emotional meaning, signaling trust, attraction, curiosity, and comfort, and he felt a swell of affection, a desire to be someone who could match that openness, that vulnerability, that quiet honesty, and as the afternoon moved toward evening, the light shifting to a golden hue that painted the room with warmth, he felt the pull to speak what he felt, to express the growing tenderness and attraction that had been building over their meetings, but he hesitated, mindful of the delicate balance, knowing that timing mattered, that emotions could be fragile, and yet the tension, the electricity between them, the unspoken connection, was undeniable, a thread weaving them together in a way that neither could ignore, and he noticed the smallest signs of her feelings, the way her foot tapped lightly under the table, the soft inhale she took before responding to something personal, the brief flush that colored her cheeks when a compliment or shared laughter struck a chord, the way her gaze met his and held just slightly longer than necessary, and he felt the excitement of recognition, the thrill of connection, the warmth of shared understanding, and he realized that love, attraction, and emotional closeness often lived in these fleeting details, in gestures unnoticed by the casual observer, in signals that only attentive hearts could read and respond to, and he leaned back for a moment, taking it all in, marveling at how someone's body language could speak volumes, how subtle cues revealed emotions, how glances, tilts of the head, touches, and pauses could convey longing, vulnerability, and affection more profoundly than any words, and as their conversation drifted toward shared hopes and dreams, he felt an almost tangible intimacy, a closeness that transcended verbal expression, and she responded in kind, her eyes soft, her posture open, her small smiles hinting at feelings not yet named but deeply felt, and he found himself drawn irresistibly, wanting to be closer, wanting to understand her fully, to honor her trust, to match her openness, and in a moment of quiet courage, he brushed his hand lightly against hers, a fleeting touch that lingered just long enough to communicate what words could not, and he saw her eyes widen slightly, then soften, a blush coloring her cheeks, a subtle lean toward him, and in that single moment, he felt the depth of their connection, the power of shared emotion expressed through silence, gesture, and glance, and he realized that human hearts often spoke in these small, almost invisible ways, that the language of affection, attraction, and intimacy was hidden in the smallest movements, and he wanted to stay attuned, to respond carefully, to cherish every nuance, every micro-expression, every fleeting signal, and as the cafe began to empty, leaving them in the quiet warmth of closing hours, he felt the ache of wanting to prolong the moment, to linger in this fragile bubble where connection, understanding, and emotion flowed freely without interference, and she seemed to feel the same, her gaze reluctant to part, her hand still resting near his, her body leaning slightly forward as if drawn by the same invisible force, and he knew, with a quiet certainty that left him both breathless and exhilarated, that this was more than attraction, more than curiosity, more than simple interest. This was a deep, tender connection, a bond growing through observation, attention, and emotional resonance, a dance of hearts and gestures, a silent language that only they could understand, and as they finally stood to leave, the rain having slowed to a gentle drizzle, their eyes met one last time, lingering, holding, conveying all the words neither had spoken, and Aiden felt a rush of hope, anticipation, and longing, knowing that the next meeting would take them further into this intricate, emotional, and intimate journey, and he walked away with a quiet thrill, carrying the memory of her expressions, gestures, and subtle signals, replaying them endlessly in his mind, analyzing, appreciating, and anticipating, because he understood now, more than ever, that true connection was built not only through words but through attention, care, and the ability to see and respond to the small, beautiful language of the human heart, and he couldn't wait to see her again, to continue decoding her signals, to explore the unspoken emotions that drew them together, and to discover where this silent, powerful, tender connection might lead them next. The weeks following their initial meetings had created a rhythm between Aiden and Alara, a delicate, unspoken understanding that seemed to grow with every glance, every subtle gesture, and every shared conversation, and today felt different from the start, a kind of electricity in the air that made Aiden's chest tighten as he approached the cafe, knowing she would be there, already settled in her corner seat with the soft light falling across her face, highlighting the gentle curve of her features and the thoughtful glint in her eyes, and when their eyes met, that familiar, intimate smile appeared, the kind that carried recognition, curiosity, and a quiet warmth. And as he walked toward her, he noticed how she had positioned herself just so, slightly angled toward the door as if expecting him, her hands resting lightly on the table, her fingers moving subtly, almost rhythmically, a small dance of nervous anticipation and excitement, and he felt the same fluttering in his own stomach that had marked their first meeting, the thrill of approaching someone who had slowly, patiently, and subtly captured his attention, and he greeted her softly, a tone meant to comfort as well as connect. And she responded with ease now, her nervousness replaced with a gentle openness, a body language that spoke of trust and the willingness to share more of herself, and as they began to speak, the conversation moved fluidly, effortlessly, touching on small details of daily life, work, hopes, and fears, and with every exchange Aiden noticed the micro-movements, a tilt of her head when she agreed with something he said, the way her eyes softened during a personal story, the slight forward lean as if drawn closer not only physically but emotionally, and he realized with a quiet thrill that he could almost read her heart in these moments, understanding what she felt before she even spoke, and he responded in kind, leaning slightly toward her, mirroring her movements subtly, creating an invisible dance of connection that drew them together in a way that was intimate, tender, and safe, a gentle language of emotion that required no words, and as the rain tapped lightly on the windows, casting a rhythmic background, their conversation deepened, moving from small talk to the quiet sharing of hopes and dreams, the fears they sometimes held close, and the moments that had shaped them, and Aiden noticed how Alara's gestures became more expressive as she trusted him more, how her hands moved freely now, how her eyes met his with curiosity and openness, how her small smiles lingered just slightly longer, all subtle signs of emotional intimacy building between them, and he felt a warmth spread through him, a mixture of admiration, longing, and tenderness, because he understood that this was more than attraction. This was the beginning of a true emotional bond, formed through attention, care, and the ability to read and respond to the quiet signals of the heart. And as the hours passed, they laughed together at shared memories, teased gently, and found themselves comfortable in silence, each presence soothing, comforting, and yet thrilling, and he noticed how her body language expressed more than her words could, a soft sigh as she recounted a hope, a slight pause as she described a disappointment, the way she leaned in unconsciously when something resonated with her, the subtle brush of her hand across the table when they laughed, all signs of a heart opening and revealing itself slowly, carefully, intentionally, and he felt honored to witness it, to participate, to mirror, to respond, to hold space for her feelings, and as the evening deepened, the golden sunlight fading into a dusky glow, he realized he could no longer hold back the feelings that had grown quietly over weeks, the tenderness, the care, the desire to be close not only emotionally but as someone she could trust, someone she could lean on, someone who could understand the unspoken words of her heart, and with a gentle courage, he spoke softly, sharing a glimpse of his own feelings, a confession not of passion but of connection, admiration, and genuine care, and he watched her carefully, noticing the shift in her expression, the softening of her gaze, the way her hands stilled slightly on the table, the small inhale as she processed the words, and he felt his own heart race with the hope that she felt similarly, that the subtle signals he had observed, the attention he had paid, the shared smiles and touches had created a bond strong enough to hold the truth, and she responded slowly, carefully, her voice quiet but steady, sharing that she had felt the same, that the gestures, the attentiveness, the subtle mirroring, and the shared moments had created a connection that words had struggled to express, and in that moment, he felt a wave of relief, joy, and deep tenderness, knowing that what they had built together was mutual, respected, and cherished. And as they spoke further, their conversation became a dance of understanding, reflection, shared laughter, and gentle emotion, a confirmation of the quiet bond that had been growing all along, and he noticed how her posture relaxed completely, how her eyes lingered with warmth and curiosity, how her gestures were open, inviting, and honest, and he responded in turn, offering his full attention, his quiet admiration, his gentle gestures that mirrored hers, and they both understood that this connection was rare, delicate, and precious, a true intimacy built not on haste or impulsive passion, but on observation, empathy, understanding, and emotional resonance. And as the cafe grew quiet, the few remaining customers leaving, the golden glow fading into soft shadows, they continued to talk, share, laugh, and sit in comfortable silence, a presence that was both thrilling and grounding, and he realized that he could read her signals with increasing clarity, that each glance, each tilt of the head, each brush of the hand carried meaning, emotion, and intent, and that in this careful observation, he could respond, connect, and participate in a dialogue of hearts that transcended words. And he noticed the way her hand lingered near his on the table, the small, fleeting touches that were electric yet tender, the way her eyes searched his face for reaction, the way her body subtly angled toward him, inviting closeness without pressure, and he understood fully that emotional connection, attraction, and intimacy were often expressed most powerfully through these quiet, delicate gestures. And he felt a surge of gratitude, awe, and affection, knowing that he was part of a story unfolding that was both personal and profound, a gentle romance that grew from attentiveness, care, and understanding. And as the evening drew to a close, he finally spoke with gentle honesty, sharing the depth of his feelings, the admiration, the tenderness, the genuine affection that had grown over weeks of observing, connecting, and understanding. And she listened, her eyes soft, her posture open, her small nods and subtle smiles affirming the mutuality of their feelings, and when he reached out gently, their hands met across the table, a lingering, tender connection that spoke more than words could, and he felt a wave of warmth, reassurance, and quiet exhilaration, knowing that this was the beginning of a shared emotional journey, that their bond, built on observation, empathy, subtle gestures, and heartfelt conversation, was strong, real, and meaningful. And as they finally rose to leave, stepping into the quiet drizzle outside, they walked side by side, their hands brushing gently, their shoulders almost touching, a closeness that spoke of trust, care, and the promise of more moments, more understanding, more shared glances and gestures, and Aiden felt a deep contentment, a quiet thrill, a tender longing for the future, knowing that they had discovered something rare, beautiful, and lasting, a connection expressed not just through words but through the delicate, profound language of the heart, body, and soul, a connection that would continue to grow through attention, care, understanding, and mutual respect. And he walked beside her with a quiet smile, replaying every glance, every gesture, every subtle cue that had led them here, feeling the beauty of this delicate, emotional, and romantic bond, and he understood, more than ever, that love, connection, and intimacy were often found in the quiet, unspoken moments, the tiny details, the gestures and glances that spoke volumes. And as they parted for the night, exchanging a lingering look, a soft smile, and a promise to meet again, he carried with him the warmth, hope, and quiet joy that comes from truly understanding another person, from connecting on a level that words alone cannot capture, and he felt certain that this was only the beginning of something tender, meaningful, and unforgettable, a story of hearts attuned to each other, a romance built on care, observation, and subtle, profound emotional understanding that would continue to unfold beautifully in the days and weeks to come.